Well, welcome to the College Admission Lab from Khan Lab School. I'm your host, Brennan Barnard. I'm the Director of College Counseling, and I am joined today by our founder, Sal Khan. And Sal is also the founder and CEO of Khan Academy, Schoolhouse.World, and Khan World School. And our guest is Micki Kidder, who is the Vice President for Undergraduate Enrollment at Notre Dame. And Micki has previously served as the Vice President for University Enterprises and Events and comes from a background as a CPA, which is super interesting. Thank you for joining us, Micki and Sal.
Thank you.
To be here.
So Micki, maybe and for folks who are just joining us, please use the Q&A to put in your questions for Sal and Micki, and also we have the chat open. So if you want to share where you're zooming in from, we'd love to hear where you're zooming in from and whether you're a student or a parent or a counselor. And so we'll get that going. And while they do that, Micki, can you just give us a kind of brief overview of your educational career journey, how you got to where you are?
Absolutely. And Brennan, thanks again. Sal, thanks again for your time tonight and for everyone tuning in tonight. I've had an interesting and wonderful journey to this position. Brennan earned my undergraduate degree through the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University in Bloomington. Had a phenomenal experience there. Went on to be a CPA, as you stated earlier, with PricewaterhouseCoopers in Chicago for a number of years, and really loved what I did. Had phenomenal clients, worked with terrific people, really enjoyed the career, but found myself moving to South Bend, Indiana for some family items and didn't really know what I was going to do next. And a good mentor of mine at PwC said, you know what, I think you should look at Notre Dame. I think you'd be a great mission fit. And got my first job here 21 years ago, actually. I just celebrated my 21st anniversary last week. Started in internal audit because I thought that's what I should do. And over the last 21 years, I just feel incredibly, incredibly blessed. I've done a number of things here at the University of Notre Dame. Worked in the president's office for a good number of years with our board secretariat's office. Served as chief of staff for executive vice president. Spent a decade in our advancement office. And then, as you stated earlier, spent several years as our vice president for University Enterprises and Events, which really runs all of our auxiliary revenue generating entities at Notre Dame. And 3 years ago was very honored and privileged to step into this role as VP for undergraduate enrollment. And I would say, to kind of summarize, I thought I loved what I did until I joined an organization where I really firmly believe in the mission. And that's when I realized the value proposition of advancing a mission you believe in. And so that's what I've done for the last 21 years, and feel really grateful and honored to be able to advance Notre Dame's mission in this particular role as we extend invitations to the next generation of Notre Dame students and ultimately alumni and family members. So really, really honored and blessed.
It sounds like you've done just about everything there, but maybe football coach.
Yeah, I'm going to stay away from that one, I think, for a while.
Well, and I'd love to come back to later in our talk to that idea of mission and how especially juniors might think about that. But we are just days away from May 1st, which is for those who don't know, is the national candidate reply date when seniors applicants must decide where they're going to enroll. And what, as students, if students who haven't made their decision, who are kind of waiting to the last moment, how would you advise them? What advice would you give them to narrow down maybe the two or three schools they're trying to figure out how to choose?
Sure. So, to put it concisely, I'm a big believer in gut instinct, or trust your gut, or in other words, trust your heart. I really think at the end of the day, an individual's happiness quotient is something that only they're going to know in terms of knowing themselves and knowing what environment and culture is going to be right to help them be the greatest version of themselves. And I really would encourage young people to authentically do some reflection on that. So many institutions are going to offer extraordinary academic curriculum, right, and experiences, and things like advising and tutoring and faculty to staff ratio. All those things are really, really important. And at the end of the day, many of those things contribute to the culture of an institution. And so I would encourage young people to reflect on that and do your homework, about the culture of an organization. I'm a big believer in mission, vision, and values, why a university exists, where it's going, and how it's going to play its game. I think that's important. And only that young person and their most closely held advisors are going to be able to go through that discernment process. But at the end of the day, trust your heart.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and Sal, you mean you have run very mission-driven organizations that kind of the culture within the organization is really important at Khan Academy and at Khan Lab School. What any thoughts on how to get at that as students think about kind of discerning that culture? Oh, you're muted.
I, I think it is actually hard with just a visit or looking at a website or some brochures to really gauge culture. The reality is that the great majority of universities in the US have it all. You can likely find subcultures within the broader culture that you can kind of find things that will make you better. Brennan, you and I talk to a lot of students. There's no right decision. You got to make the decision right. And making the decision right is generally about putting yourself out there, stepping out of your comfort zone, meeting people, engaging people with people who aren't like yourself, taking some risks, trying some things out that you've never tried before, academic risks, social risks in a good way. Um, and yeah, I completely agree with Mickey. Like it's at the end of the day, it's your gut. Um, it's more about what you do once you get there. I think most students, if you're lucky enough to be in a position to pick, and if there's a toss up between one or two or three schools, just trust your gut and then get into the mode of, okay, I'm going to make this an awesome decision.
Yeah, I mean that's true with any big life decision, right? I mean, you face something that seems significant, and as long as you own the decision and embrace it and kind of lean in and make the best of it, then you can.
And I will say just one thing, I met a family that took a tour of a university that I know well, and they said, "Oh, we decided we're not going to be into that one because the tour guide said this," and I was like, "That's one person," and I was like, "I know that school. That's not indicative of the broader school." So, be careful about that. You meet one person on a tour, or you hear one story, or there's some stereotype on the internet. Be very wary of that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
go
will
ahead.
underscore. I hear that so much, Sal, that students or and families typically as a whole, will decide on even creating awareness and investigating, if you will, the culture of a school and the offerings based on one current student that they meet. And I couldn't agree more with you. There's so many beautiful, individual, awesome, vibrant humans on a university's campus. That's at its core what makes universities so great. And so get to know a lot of people, right? Get to know a lot of aspects of an institution and not make an assumption based on one interaction. I agree.
Yeah, I like to tell students to ask the same question to multiple people on campus, right? Ask it to the mission office and ask it to a student you run into and ask it to your tour guide and ask it to maybe a professor and see if you start to hear kind of common themes or are they all saying something totally different, right? Kind of look for that triangulation. So if you are just joining us, feel free to put any questions in the Q&A for Micki or Sal, and we'll get to those. We're going to try to keep them broad, not necessarily about Notre Dame, but um, questions about admissions and the process. Um, and Micki, maybe we could turn to those students who, while they're going to need to make a decision by May 1st, they might be on wait lists. And I know the wait list has gotten significantly more active at schools across the country in the last year or two, or that last really 5 or so years. Can you talk about kind of how Notre Dame approaches the wait list and how students might think about it?
Absolutely. So the wait list is obviously a situation that I would say many students find themselves in a situation where they've received an invitation to remain on a wait list at this point. Um, Frankly, in some regards, that's driven by a number of variables, including, but certainly not limited to, the common application, students applying to so many institutions at this point. And um, institutions, of course, wanting to make sure that they're extending invitations for admission to students who authentically want to contribute to that university's mission, but for a whole number of reasons, may not ultimately end up enrolling, even if they receive an invitation. Uh, I will offer that we will never invite someone to remain on the wait list unless they are extraordinarily academically competitive within our pool, and where we see in them a beautiful set of attributes that are consistent with the University of Notre Dame's values and its mission. And so an invitation to stay on the wait list is very sincere from us. Uh, After May 1, we will make a determination. Some years we're in a really high yield rate, right? So the conversion of invited students for admission to those who ultimately enroll, where we don't have flexibility to go to the wait list, but our intent and hope is that we can every year in some capacity. And so when we offer that, please know it's very, very genuine. Post May 1, you may see a lot of shifting, even of students who made a decision and for a whole number of reasons ultimately don't matriculate to that institution where they've confirmed enrollment. And so we hopefully will extend invitations to students on that wait list. Again, all of whom we sincerely are grateful for their interest. We're so excited and impressed with their application materials. And we hope to ultimately extend some of those invitations.
And we've already, I mean, there's already been a ton of waitlist activity. I mean, we've had students at Khan Lab School already come off the waitlist at schools, and as colleges track their enrollments, they're doing some early outreach, and the way it's moved, some are doing it straight through the into the summer nowadays. So, um, Sal, any thoughts for students as they think about like sitting on a wait list and maybe how to move on or how to kind of process it?
Yeah, Micki knows much better about what's going on behind the scenes and the probabilities and all of that. Brennan and I know a few students who've, uh, it's hard, because I can imagine, in certain cases, maybe the school that you've been waitlisted is now your first choice, but there is something about, the person who asked you to dance the first time versus the someone so I can sense that emotional it's hard to process that, not quite rejection, but not quite acceptance. But yeah, I agree with Micki. We've definitely encouraged some students who are, if they're serious about it, to stay on and express their seriousness, because yes, we understand that that's what a lot of universities are having to think about.
Right. And go ahead.
Brennan, I was reflecting. I think something you mentioned earlier is really important to state because so I absolutely love this work that I'm honored to do for Notre Dame, and admissions for institutions of higher learning is such a stressful time for young people, right? And in some ways, that is so hard to navigate if you're 17 or 18 years old, and certainly the parent or loved one of a young person. And so, something you mentioned earlier, I thought is really applicable here. Ultimately, if a young person makes a decision and their heart's set and their desire, like on the institution that offered them admission out of the gate, go for it, right? If your heart really desires to stay on that wait list, go for it. No matter what you choose, these young people are going to be extraordinary leaders and amazing humans. And they're going to have so many opportunities on whatever institution they ultimately decide. And so, kind of that you do you, right? Like, um, do what your heart says. And there's nothing wrong with advancing on the institution that gave you an invitation. And there's also nothing wrong with being patient and waiting. It's your own individual journey, I think.
And but get excited about that school that you do where you do
Yes.
enroll, because kind of holding out for the wait list and can be kind of a fool's errand in some senses. Um, Something you said, Micki, was I think would be helpful for people to understand. You talked about you want to kind of enroll students who are excited about the university and are a good fit for the mission and things like that. How do you determine that through an application? Like, what are some of the key indicators?
Sure. So there's a couple of variables that we'll look for. I mean, academic preparation and potential is certainly a foundational element that is a must do, right? So we'll look at curriculum in the classroom, the rigor of that curriculum, certainly how a young person does in the courses. Although I'm a big believer, being human means we're not perfect. And so the fact that we have created this world where we expect perfection out of 17 and 18-year-olds, I don't agree with it. So when we say, rigor in the classroom and performance in the classroom, There's so much context that goes with that, but we certainly have to look at foundationally academic preparation and potential. But then we spend a lot of time looking at kind of the heart of a young person, right? What kind of human they are. Do they do they have a passion for the mission of Notre Dame, which is distinct, right, than many other institutions of higher learning? I mean, everything here is informed by our Catholic character. We're committed to making sure that we're educating the mind and heart of young people, and so a passion for that mission is important to us. And then we look at what attributes an individual demonstrates, and are they consistent with ones we hold dear here? So things like kindness and humility and resilience and a commitment to the common good and service to others. These are really attributes that are consistent with the university's values. So we'll look at things, certainly their extracurriculars. Again, they don't have to be the leader of every sports team, the captain of every sports team. There aren't enough spots for those kids. But are they demonstrating leadership in their communities? We'll look at their essays. They are immensely important to us because it shows us some insight, again, into the heart of a young person and the type of human that they are. Letters of recommendation cannot be understated sufficiently enough. These are the adults walking the halls with these young people. I'm not in the halls. I don't see how they treat their peers every day, but their teachers and their counselors certainly do. And so we look for indicators through those type of resources or components of the application that again get to the core of the mission of Notre Dame, which is head and heart, and both are equally important here.
Well, and I think I mean, there's so many questions that came in through registration about, how do I stand out, or how does my student stand out in a mission? And I think what you're saying is, yes, they need to be a strong student, but they also, it's not as much about standing out as it is just about who they are as an individual and who they are in a community.
Yeah. Authenticity is the number one word I would consistently use. It is so important here. We want to know who you authentically are as a human and how you're going to contribute and enrich this community in really beautiful ways.
Yeah. I think I think authenticity is tough too, though, right? Because I think students hear authenticity a lot from colleges and from counselors, and they wonder what that is. Like, how do I be authentic? How do I be more authentic than I am already? It's almost like this game of kind of trying to manufacture authenticity. I mean, there's a question here about AI, speaking of authenticity, and how many universities are using AI to sort through applications is the question. And what can I do to make my application, there we go, stand out from AI beyond the regular GPA and extracurricular? Do you have a sense from talking with colleagues about kind of the use of AI? I mean, I have a little sense, but I'd love to hear what you've heard.
Sure. I mean, there's certainly conversations amongst my counterparts and amongst peer institutions on the utilization of AI as we're reading, right? And trying to give you some context, with 35,000 applications this year for 3,000 invitations for admission. I mean, that ratio is significant, right? Um, there's also a lot of dialogue on how much the students are using AI, right, to generate their essay responses, et cetera. Here's what I can offer you from both and. Uh, on the former, we are placing human eyes and a lot of time on individual applications. I think it's a level of respect for the young people. They've taken the time and they've taken the interest to demonstrate some enthusiasm for the University of Notre Dame and the time to complete an application. So I think we owe it to them, out of respect, to make sure that a human and multiple, frankly, are reviewing their applications. As it relates to, are the students using AI? I'm sure they are, candidly, to at least get a rough draft of some type of response. What I would tell you is, I think we can tell more times than not. And that authenticity, if a young person tries to create like humor in their essay and they're not at their core a very funny person, that shows through, right? By contrast, if somebody has a really dry sense of humor and they write a really concise short answer or essay that's really witty, AI can not always replicate that, right? And so we can tell, and it matters to us. The consistency through the application is also a way that we can kind of sniff out a fully AI written essay response.
Is everything lining up between the recommendations and
Right.
the different parts of the essay or the application? Sal, how do you wish colleges, if you do, how do you, and you and I have talked a little bit about this, but how do you wish they would use AI
Yeah.
in
I really like Mickey's answer there because she didn't pretend that kids are not using it at all. And I always point out that, we talk about using AI, but we know that there's many students who use HI, who use human intelligence advisors, coaches, consultants all the time. And obviously, some humans can do much of those same things, make it funnier for you, or, there's a big gray area on how much effort is too much effort. I actually think it would be healthy, actually. If on the student side, uh, college admissions officers kind of said exactly what Mickey said, like, look, I mean, in the world, you're going to be using AI to come up with a draft or maybe to look at, I mean, everyone will look at it for like, tools like Grammarly and things like they are AI, and they started with grammar, but they're getting a little quite beyond grammar, and there's a lot of gray area there. But it's emphasizing that it's really your voice and it's really you. I have to give some speeches in a couple of weeks, and I'm like, oh, maybe I could use AI. I'm not going to say AI write the speech. What I did is I uh, recorded my own thoughts, less structured, but just train of thought on a phone. Then I had one AI transcribe it. Then I had another AI. I said, hey, here's some of the parameters. This is kind of but here are my words. Can you help me structure it? And even when it produces at that point, it's not like I'm just going to like give that speech because I'm like, oh, that's not right. That's not what but then it got me from 0 to 1 pretty fast. And then with my own thoughts and my own words. And then I was able, and then we're actually right now tweaking them and things like that. I think that's actually a healthy um, level of, or if you take a first draft and then you run it through some type of an AI and said, give me feedback on it. It's like, hey, maybe you better hook and maybe you're brainstorming hooks, but that's analogous to working with your parents, your siblings, a consultant, someone at your school, your guidance counselor on how do you make your essays better. So I think all of that's good. And I also agree with Mickey that if it doesn't have you in it, it's probably going to show in some way, shape, or form. And you would feel kind of dirty about it too, frankly, if it's not the substance of what you believe. Um, on the other side, for looking at applications, I think it is going to be I, it is an interesting conversation, a longer conversation on, the essays and recommendations were developed in a time where those were the only way, really, of being able to glean a little bit of personality, a little bit of context about someone. I think we're getting into a world, there's been other things like interviews, but interviews are very subjective, much more subjective than even who's reading your essay, etc. I think it would be interesting to explore in the next 5+ years other types of things that are actually less gameable, more interactive, more authentic to what. So, just for the sake of argument, imagine if Notre Dame or other peer institutions had a little place where it's just like, start your AI simulation now. You click on it and it records the student and it's just asking questions and having a conversation with them. And then at the end, it gives the student some feedback on and maybe you can do it as many times as you want. And it gives you feedback every time. Hey, make more eye contact, do this, do that. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe schools can decide. But I think things like that could actually be a very interesting melding of the essay. It's actually lower stress if it's something that you really can't prepare for. Um, it would take less time because you literally just press a button and say, all right, go. and 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 in some ways it's less gameable but you might be able to glean some other aspects of someone like how well they're their presence, their humor. It's much harder to fake humor live than it is written.
well, and as to the kind of developmental aspect of this experience, right? They might learn something about themselves as they have that back and forth, or they might learn about, how to present themselves in an interview or something like that. I'll put it in the chat, but I wrote a piece for Forbes about using AI to help, back to that kind of making your decision, how to use it to make a to choose a college, basically. And I reached out to some counselors and other folks that gave me some great prompts to use to kind of create a spreadsheet between comparing different aspects of different colleges. And it's really pretty amazing some of the background research it can do to help kind of inform decisions you make, right? And again, you have to take that with a grain of salt and then use your heart, right? Like as you said, Micki, but to have some of that kind of background information is really helpful. And even just some fun ideas, right? Like I don't know if either of you have played around or seen people playing around with the kind of, create an action figure,
Mhm.
right? You've probably seen it on social media. What if we had students, they were allowed to use ChatGPT to create an action figure of themselves that they would then share with the college as an applicant?
Or
And I
make a movie, or make a movie of them, like a
Oh yeah,
like
yeah,
a movie trailer. I mean, there's so much stuff that you can now expect with these
yeah,
tools. The
yeah.
action figure might be too easy. But yeah,
Yeah,
maybe.
or right, like, or have a podcast. Have the student upload a bunch of different documents that they from their research or from their classes or a project they did or things like that, and then have Notebook LM, create a podcast that a mission officer could listen to as they were reading the application and hear a podcast about that student and who they are. I mean,
Yeah.
there's all kinds of different ideas that I think we could lean into. I
And just one other thing, Brennan, to underscore on that, I think it's such a provocative, interesting conversation because these tools we're talking about, they're way more accessible to these young people than some of these more historical, traditional avenues that applicants would pursue in order to kind of make sure they were going to shine the most, right, in their application. These young people are doing all of these things we're talking about, and we don't want to be complacent on it, right? I mean, I think we can kind of reinvent this space in a really authentic, fun, creative manner that's super accessible to these young people, and equalizes, right, that experience for them.
and give them a menu of options, right? Like you can either submit a standard essay or you could do one of these other things.
Right.
Yeah,
Video, I mean, even before AI, I mean, short form video. I know there's some schools that are using you can submit a video, but I think that's another one. I know when if it's like high stakes college, people are gonna like try to make a script and probably overproduce it, but like, it might, so for some students, to Mickey's point, like making a 1 minute video might be a lot more natural for them than writing a traditional essay, and you might be able to glean a lot more about them.
Yeah.
yeah. And those ones that are overproduced are, again, you can see right through the authenticity, right?
Unless it's a great production. That's, but who knows?
Well, then that's a skill there alone.
Yeah.
So there's a question, Mickey, maybe you could talk to this. Do universities Google students or look at their social media or LinkedIn or that kind of thing when they're reviewing applications?
So I certainly can't speak for all schools, right? We're going to, I think it's really important, at least here, that we review the set of materials that have been provided to us by the young person. When we start getting into reaching out on our own to these ancillary tools, to me, that actually does create a situation where you don't have a consistent, comprehensive, and equitable review of every applicant. And so we refrain from that. But again, I can't speak to every institution. I can only speak to how we do it.
Well, and I will say I don't think it's a common practice among admission offices, but I will say that students do need to be wary because sometimes a college admission officer, they'll be reading an application and something will be mentioned in the extracurricular, like I won this prize or I was part of this organization, and they're thinking, I've never heard of this organization. I want to learn something about it, so they might Google the student's name and the organization or something like that. And, social media will pop up. So, I mean, you just need to be aware that it can happen, right? It's not standard practice, but these things can kind of pop up.
And employers definitely are looking at it. I definitely look at people that we're interviewing. So, um, uh, and social media has a way of sticking around if you're not super careful. So, another reason to be careful with it.
Yeah.
I was just going to offer that. I mean, we don't go down a rabbit hole of, proactively reaching out on these things, but I'm a huge advocate for that exact last comment, Sal, that you made. And I teach in our business school here, and I educate these young people all the time. You know, you got to be responsible. Anything you put out there, and these teenagers, you know, they've hopefully had those conversations with trusted advisors in their life, but it lingers. And employers, to your point, and hiring managers absolutely are looking at those things.
So there are a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to kind of try to consolidate some of them. One is about kind of course rigor versus grades. What's of higher value to admission officers? Another one is, if a student had all high A's in honors and AP classes and been a great student, but made a mistake with a virtual class in junior year, took a risk, got a D, or a really low grade. Um, you know, how do you look at that when you're reviewing applications, and how do you kind of weigh this? You talked a little bit about it earlier, but how do you weigh this kind of idea of rigor versus kind of grades or outcome?
Yeah. So I'm going to offer an answer that is very authentic. It's not intended to punt on any of these questions, but it really does depend, and context matters, and that truly is how we look at it. So at a macro level, I would say take rigorous courses, um, especially, you know, at least for us at the University of Notre Dame. I feel deeply responsible. Every young person we admit, I have to do that knowing that they have the preparation and potential to thrive here. I'm not going to admit a young person who's just going to survive here and kind of have that duck approach, right? Where above water, they're calm, cool, collected, and underwater, it is chaos. Like, I don't think that is in the best interest of the young person. And so the rigor matters, right? That for sure, I would say lean into. And, you know, as I said earlier, we all kind of stumble at some point in life. And so if that stumbling happened one semester or year in high school and there's context to in those rigorous courses, maybe that young person slipped a bit in terms of their performance in the classroom, just tell us that. And please don't take that as it's a, you know, guaranteed like that person's going to receive an invitation for admission, but we really genuinely want to read, understand, and consider context. And so take the rigor, encourage the young person to do the best that they can in that classroom. But ultimately, the goal here is to unlock intellectual curiosity and help them find the journey and the person that they are. And so take the rigor, try a bunch of different courses. I think at the end of the day, that's in the best interest of the young person versus holding back on rigor, getting perfection in a really boring curriculum that they're not jazzed up about. That's not good for them.
Right. And what about the idea of, if they took a risk on a course and got a low grade, like retaking the course? See
Yeah,
that?
so it does happen occasionally. I mean, we'll see that sometimes. I bristle at it a little bit because I think we might be encouraging these young people that like they have to get perfection in that course. And so I bristle a little bit about that versus just providing context. But in certain situations, sure, that might be really, really appropriate. I would encourage a student to consult, obviously, with their family, also consult with the faculty in their school. Hopefully, they're in an environment where those faculty will, you know, invest in the time and the conversation. If they're not in a school environment that provides for that, find some trusted advisor. Could be through a community-based organization, could be through a school counselor. Honestly, reach out to schools. Part of the greatest part of my job is I get to interact with young people and their families. If we can be helpful in any dialogue like that, we're happy to do so.
Thanks. Yeah.
Now,
And
and
Sal,
I'm not an expert here, but
yeah,
my also sense is that like a B is very different than a D.
Yeah.
A B, everyone gets Bs every now and then if they're normal people. It's actually I'm almost sometimes skeptical if someone has never gotten a B. That's almost like they're over engineering everything. But a D, yeah, I mean, maybe someone in admissions might want to be more diplomatic about it, but I can imagine when there's so many academically qualified students applying and you have to admit a subset, it's hard unless you have some really good context of why that D happened. It probably will put you at a disadvantage for sure, unless you have really good context.
Yeah, D is going to be hard. I
Yeah,
would think,
D
I
feels very
mean,
hard.
institutions are very different. I'm sorry if
Yeah.
I missed that in the question. A D is going to be tough.
Yeah.
right? And so very much
Well,
agree with you, Sal.
well, and Sal, maybe, obviously Khan Lab School is takes a mastery learning approach to courses. Do you want to maybe just talk a little bit about that and how that encourages risk taking and the type of learning that happens?
Yeah, I mean, it actually goes right to what we were just talking about, that in theory, you should, like, if a young person should not feel this bizarre stress of like, oh, if I don't get perfection every time, then my future is I'll never go to Notre Dame or whatever. Like, that's not a healthy mindset. It should just be you should keep learning that concept. Now, at the same time, we've learned that it's also important to have good faith effort. Just because you're in a mastery learning environment, that doesn't mean that you can ignore your deadlines. It doesn't mean you can not take your first shot seriously. And these are interesting tensions that we've had to navigate as we've been building and developing this school, where and we have systems now over time to kind of do both. Like, hey, there are some deadlines, but there are ways of redeeming yourself as long as you make a good effort. Um, and and yeah, and how and but I think the important thing is that students have the mindset of like really learning the material for the material's sake. Because we see the other two in a lot of traditional environments, students might get perfection, they might get straight A's. Either it might not be at a very rigorous level, even if the names of the courses seemingly rigorous, or I mean every year you hear of high school valedictorians who flunk out their first year of college, which something was going on there. Or they just forget everything, right? They cram, they've learned to do that, and then they're not really retaining or internalizing it. So yes, that's why I'm a big believer in mastery learning, and I do believe, a lot of the students we've had at KLS, the proof is in the pudding. We keep track of them. We've had 4 or 5 graduating classes now. Not one of our 50 something graduates that we've had have told me, and we check in on them. Brennan knows, none of them said, "Oh, I'm struggling academically." All of them have found, "Hey, I'm very prepared. This is good." So, I think that's the biggest signal that the mastery learning is paying off in terms of readiness.
Right. And like Mickey said, I mean, this can be a stressful time and it seems so outcome focused. And it helps to kind of recenter on what really matters and that's the learning and also the head and the heart, right? And how are they getting involved outside the classroom and not just kind of focused on just getting that A all the time. Um, so, as we wrap up here today, I just want to see if either of you have some advice for underclass students, especially juniors, and their families who are going into the summer, how best to use their summer in terms of essays and in terms of just kind of thinking about college and admission. Maybe Mickey, we'll start with you, and then Sal, you can wrap us up.
Sure. Couple things I would suggest. Get out there if you're able to and see, right? I do think that once you step foot on a campus, uh, take note of the students who are there, even in the summer, and that's not going to be chock full of kids, but those who are there, you can kind of tell by nonverbal cues what's their happiness quotient. I actually think that matters a ton. So if you're able to travel and physically see some of these campuses, I would highly suggest it. If you're not, figure out their digital footprint and at least try to get to know them virtually. I do think I'm a big, big, big believer in this culture thing. And a lot of institutions have great culture, but there are nuances to this. And so the happiness quotient of current students, I think, is a significant indicator. Um, if there's still time permitting, I'm also a big advocate if it works in your schedule and family lifestyle to take advantage of some of these pre-college programs. Now, some of those have, surpassed in terms of the application deadline at this point, but if it works for your family, I think that's a really good opportunity to get to know an institution and also buoy the confidence of a young person. If they spend 10 to 14 days on a college campus, I kind of think they learn a lot about themselves and they learn maybe what they like and what they don't really want in a future institution of higher learning. Um, And then the third thing that I would recommend, and certainly this isn't an exhaustive list, but talk to some alumni. Um, Alumni networks, I think, are really, really good indicators of so many things that happen during a 4-year tenure when you're a student. But hopefully, the family that you're joining or the institution you're joining will be a family forever, right? And be there to advance opportunities in your life, whether it be career or personal, future educations, etc. But also, that family hopefully is there for you when you need it personally, kind of in the high milestones of your life, and when life kind of stinks and you stumble a little bit. Hopefully, people that are in that institution's family are going to be there. So I'm a big believer in do a little research and talk to some alumni from that respective institution or portfolio of those.
Great advice. And needless to say, Notre Dame has some pretty passionate alumni.
They'll tell you too. We're very proud about that.
Okay, that's great. Sal, bring us home here.
For someone who's a junior right now, I would say you don't have to get your college list perfect, but look at 5 or 10 schools that you're serious about. Um, look at the Common App essays, but also look at the school specific questions. It doesn't hurt to look at it right now. Um, it gives you a little bit more time to just let your subconscious process it and think about it. And you might even experience something in your day to day. You're like, oh, wait, this is an interesting scenario I just experienced. That might make for good for that. I actually recommend even people earlier, even your freshman or sophomore year, take a look at it. No harm, not to create stress, but just have a view, just to know what the kind of things people think about. Uh, I would also say, like, if you really have your act together, write a first draft, like knowing that you're going to throw it away. Knowing that you're going to throw it away, maybe even for just 1 or 2 schools, just knowing, and they change the essays every year, but they don't change them dramatically. I don't know, Micki, how much do y'all change your essays every year?
Supplements, some, but
Supplement.
the Common App.
Supplements, but they kind of
Yeah, there's
here
subtle differences.
there's subtle differences. So if you could get, and then I would say that junior year, um, I'm a big believer. I agree with everything Micki said. If there's ways to experience the university and all that, that's great. But I tell people, like, do something that you genuinely are interested in your summer of your junior year. But just do it with energy and don't do like, I'm gonna call it in, do an hour a day. No, like, do something that you care about, that you're passionate about. And uh, I look, you are going to be thinking about the things that you're going to be writing for your college application, but to Mickey's point, like, the readers know authenticity. So, I think if you did something, and it doesn't have to be a home run success. You might have, like, hey, you tried to put together, I don't know, I'm making stuff up, a film because you were really excited about it, and it was a dud, and you got rejected from every, film fair or whatever. Like, that's a story too. I mean, you at least tried. I personally find that interesting. I'm not an admissions officer, but when I read essays about things like that, when I see that real authenticity, I'm like, wow, someone put some real energy into this and, like, cared about it. And yeah, how it turned out, it's an interesting story either way. Encourage people and just enjoy it too. It's your last summer, maybe the second to last summer of your childhood. So enjoy it.
Great advice. Well, thank you both for joining us, and thanks to all of you who tuned in. We're going to have one last admission lab for this academic year, and then we'll continue next year. But the next one is going to be about the transition to college, which sometimes feels like an afterthought, but is very important. So we hope you'll join us then, and more information will be coming out about that. So again, Micki, thanks for joining us. Sal, thanks, and have a great night.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.